Julie, what up?
How are you?
Hey, Julie, we can't see you yet, but we're
Oh,
just to let you know.
okay.
Sorry, I was coming back to do all that.
Oh, I did this corner because who's sure today?
How was everybody today?
I'm good. Good. You want me to try? Oh, you don't.
Yeah, I think I'm good.
Did you good?
That's peach ginger.
I think we're still signed on. I told you, I said don't.
Together like a
Yep.
special name.
Hopefully she won't get timed out.
Cool, I like that. Yeah, it goes on there. A little watered down.
All right.
No, yeah, it's pretty good. That and hypothermia.
So is that a manly drink? That's brown.
No, I almost got you the hibiscus though, because it was pink.
Very nice.
So, yeah. Yeah.
Hibiscus.
You like pink drink, feminine drink.
Pretty drinks. How was everybody today?
Good.
I'm well, so we'll start off the meeting as we usually do. Jessica, all yours.
Oh, boy.
Jump right in.
Hey, thank you so much for coming in and thank you for going over the disclosures. You understand that? We can move on to the exclusive right to buy.
Which disclosure was that for?
It was the, oh gosh. It's such a long name that I have to look at it still, but one day, everyone in my office memorizes this. It's the Massachusetts Mandatory Real Estate Licensing Consumer Relationship Disclosure.
Awesome.
Okay, so you like what you heard in that?
Loved it.
Good. So I'm going to explain this to you. It is a contract, unlike the disclosure. So we're just going to start with your name, your price range, preferred location, and the general description of what you're looking for.
Okay.
Pretty straightforward there.
Yep.
And this agency, we operate in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. So we can cover both states if you're interested in more than just Massachusetts. So as a buyer's agent, we kind of went over all this, but I owe you fiduciary responsibility, to practice disclosure, fairness, good faith, obedience, loyalty. And I think, did you remember we went over that already?
That sounds
Old
vaguely
car.
familiar, right?
Okay, so do you have any questions about that?
Nope.
All right. The next is the duration of agency. We do 6 months as a standard, okay?
Why is that?
Why? Because that's around how long it takes, well, no, actually, we can get you in before then, but with paperwork and everything, we like to give you that time so I can do my job to the best of my ability and find you a place.
How do you feel about that answer if you're a consumer?
And then maybe slow down, I'm sorry.
Just keep going.
I could try it again. Let's see. So my obligations, or your obligations, you have some as well, because it's a partnership. You're going to help me out a little too with what you're looking for. It's really great to be pre-approved, so you're ready to go. It shows buyers that you're interested, especially with
Or sellers.
Yeah, sellers, sorry.
Okay.
It shows people that you are serious about the property, and with COVID and everything, it's easier to get you in for showing. So due diligence. So, since you are buying a home, you want to know the area a little bit. So I recommend, before we see it or the day of, driving around a little bit. See, you're welcome to visit the schools in the area, things like that, because it's going to be where you're living at the end of the day. And be available to see the property as well. So, we're going to have to go together and take a look. So just having you be available is great. And my responsibility to you is, of course, the word fiduciary by now. We've heard it quite a bit.
Yep.
So, and I'm going to negotiate to the best of my ability to get you the best possible deal. And also, if you have any questions about, where the property lines are, or just ask about the property, I'll find you the right source, and I can even go with you to, there's not, it's coming from the horse's mouth, not mine. So if you have any questions for
I'm
the
not buying a horse.
You're not buying a horse, but it comes from, the town, or if you have questions, you'll talk directly to the person. So I don't like to be this play telephone. I want you to hear it from the first person. In this next paragraph, 5, it just talks about how don't work with any other agents once this is signed. We're working together, and it's an agreement. So moving right along, the next is payment, and it's standard here that we do charge 3%.
So I was told that buyers don't have to pay a fee.
Yeah, a lot of agencies do charge a 3% commission, and more often than not, we can negotiate when you're seeing a property to bring it down to maybe 2% and you pay only 1%. So, and anytime we see a property, I'm going to let you know what that breaks down to before going into the property, so you'll have an idea.
Okay, so I owe a fee.
3%. But more often than not, you won't have to pay that whole 3%.
Why is that?
Because the seller is going to pay part of that. So
And how do they do that?
they're going to pay, how we negotiate, but it could be 2% and then you'll end up paying 1%.
Okay.
Does that make sense to you?
Doesn't quite answer my question, but keep going.
Okay. All right. So the next is my role, and I represent you as your broker. So if anyone asks, I represent you. And I'm not a property inspector or a tax advisor or any of those things, so I can put you in touch with the right people, but I don't have any background in those things, just real estate. My skills are negotiating for you and finding the best place. And I know we talked about non-designated agency. Do you understand what that meant?
I think so.
When you hire me, you're hiring a team. It's a great advantage to you. And then consent to dual agency, that's just permission to work in dual agency. I'm going to notify you if that were to happen. And that does happen sometimes. If you're interested in a property that our brokerage is also, selling, that could turn into that. But it might not happen, most likely not. But if it does, I will let you know ahead of time.
All right, so you said, I remember you talked about disclosed dual
Yes,
agency.
always disclose.
Right, when we were doing the state form there, but I don't understand what consent is.
Consent just means that you're okay with if that were to come about, if you're okay with that. And here at our agency, what we do if that does happen is we'll assign someone else to cover one of the other,
I wouldn't go there.
Okay, sorry, I was trying to get more details. But yeah, so that just means that you'll be notified if it turns into a dual agency and you're okay with that.
Okay.
Okay. So declaration of agency is that you're not working with anyone else.
Okay.
Okay, you're just gonna work with me and other buyers. So we as an agency might represent other buyers looking at the same area that you're looking in or the same house perhaps. It's very rare, but it might happen. Just want you to be aware of that. Okay. And then equal opportunity. We cover all fair housing laws. So I treat everyone equally. It doesn't matter your religion or race. I think that's pretty straightforward, but you can read those over if you have any questions. And then the entire agreement modification thereof. That means if there's anything, which is very rare, hardly ever, but if there's anything we want to change, we both sign it, initial it, and move forward. And then assignment, this is our contract. So you cannot sell or give this contract to anyone else between you and I.
Okay.
So any questions on everything that we covered?
Lots.
Lots? Okay, go ahead.
Good.
Oh, boy. I haven't done this in a couple of days.
How'd you do?
I liked that you kept smiling. It was nice.
Smile through it.
Anyone else? That's encouraging.
All right. Let me have it. Sorry.
So let me ask you a couple of questions.
Go for it.
So do you think that Jessica was knowledgeable about the contract itself?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
She's
Okay.
knowledgeable of it.
Okay. Did she ask me enough questions to make sure I understood it?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Did she qualify or even somehow indicate that I need to hire her to do the job?
Maybe not.
maybe not.
Okay, so that's one of the things, and again, not just picking on Jessica here, because it's true of everybody here. You have a wonderful opportunity
Yeah.
while you're going through this to reference the fact that they need to hire you to do a job. And you're going through this document because this is the document that hires you to do the job. And focus on things I particularly like to focus on when we talk about the exclusivity. This is when you commit to me and I get to commit to you. Because remember, I can work with you without this, but why would I do that? If you're not willing to commit to me, why should I give you all of the resources and my market knowledge and negotiating skill for free, and then you walk off and go to an open house and buy a house? So I think it's incumbent upon you, as you guys start to practice with each other on this, is to make sure that you're talking in terms of when you hire me, right? And kind of build that in and build it into your, build in a lot more interaction with it that, simple things like, does that make sense? Very easy questions like that. I'm not saying you didn't do it. I think we could do it more because this is a contract and you need to make sure that they are comfortable with it. Nobody will sign it if they are not comfortable with it.
What could I have done better on the 3%?
You tell me. Or you let your friends tell you as well.
Okay, you guys can tell me.
I don't know, are we allowed to say most other agencies also charge 3%?
I wouldn't.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you guys things. So in the morning meeting, kind of goes along with it. You know how we were talking about Nicole's situation with the person, but the lender and the other person were saying, oh, attorneys.
Mm-hmm.
So my boyfriend told me almost all the time people ask him, is it normal for someone to charge me this 3%? And they asked him like point blank.
Yeah.
And his answer is usually like more. He said he's seeing more agencies doing that, and so it's like hard. He doesn't want it. He knows not to give an opinion and stuff. So even he is very careful answering that question. But he'll just say, yeah, it is normal. I do see it often.
So let me read you the response that I got back from the mortgage company literally while I was in my last meeting. You tell me what you think of this. This is from their corporate counsel.
Never gives his opinion though. Like,
This is from their corporate counsel, which I found incredibly interesting. Let me find it. Sorry.
I've been thinking about that.
See, I obsess on these things.
People ask
Oh, I know.
though. People ask
Thank
a
you.
lot.
But it bothers me because it's
Yeah, he said it's no one's business.
it is absolutely unequivocally, if I can find it.
He couldn't believe, because I told him like that people have asked, and he couldn't believe people would ask. Or
I don't have a problem with people
I
asking.
mean, say to the buyer, sorry, say to a buyer, oh, he never.
It's one thing if the client
Is
asks
asking,
them, initiates
yeah.
it. It's a whole nother thing when the attorney out of nowhere blatantly just initiates the
Yeah, like
conversation.
he's like, I would never do that.
Yeah.
Like totally.
There's nothing to do with them.
Exactly.
That's fine. I can't find it. I must have deleted it at my aggravation.
He's been like, no, but.
When you work with the best of the best, you could expect a 3%.
Yeah.
It's not showing up, so I must have done something. Bear with me.
Maybe, I sometimes accidentally archive things.
I do
So
too,
sometimes
so I
I'll
always
make sure it's in the archive.
do the search if I know their like actual like user email. I'll just search it.
I would
Like, my emails always disappear.
An attorney and a lender said that to me. I would have been so annoyed.
All right. I don't have it. I don't want to waste a lot of time trying to
Lost
find
your
it.
favorite email.
I lost my favorite email.
Summarize it.
Yeah,
You
so
search their name,
I just did.
you know, it didn't come up.
It doesn't come up. And it's not even in trash, which is next favorite. Oh, there it is. So, Mr. Freilich, the below was brought to my attention after looking at this matter. It's my understanding that our mutual customer did not fully understand the terms of the broker agreement she entered into with your firm. And as a result, she reached out to others to better understand it. While we try to be a knowledgeable resource to our clients on industry practice, when asked, we did not do the things in your accusations. Moreover, the lender and the closing agent have an obligation to inquire about a fee to properly disclose it on the closing disclosure. As you may know, the majority of the time, the buyer's broker fee is covered in the split with the seller's agent. Having the shortage where the buyer has to cover it is unusual. and would have to be disclosed differently. Further, in the end, everyone agreed that the terms of the contract should be followed and the fee should be paid as agreed to. I hope this clarifies any confusion. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't like that he said that most places. or what
Industry
he places-
practice.
Yeah, I don't,
Right,
that's like his opinion.
correct.
Like, he shouldn't have written that. That would have really
Mhm.
bothered me.
But why do we share this with you? Not just because Eric wants to show you how nasty we can be with attorneys and things like that. It's about the fact that you're going to face this when you're sitting at a closing table, and you need to be prepared to be able to have that discussion.
Right.
I like your boyfriend's answer is, if it were me, you know, I have an issue. You want to be an industry resource. Be a resource for mortgage people. Don't be an industry resource because you have no idea what I do for a living, how I do it. I don't care how much business or how long you've been in the business. You have no idea, and I am entitled to my fees, period. Okay? And did our client misunderstand it? Absolutely unequivocally not.
Right.
Not even, because I was there listening to her speak to Nicole about it. So there's no question it wasn't misunderstood.
Yeah.
So the thing for me about this paragraph is we want to make sure that people understand that, yeah, there's a customary practice that sellers or the seller's agent is going to offer some form of almost always, because it's never definitive. More often than not, it's going to offer some form of compensation to me or to my firm as the buyer agent. However, it may cover some, it may cover all, it may cover none of the fee. It doesn't, all it's going to do is lessen your obligation if they cover some of it. Okay? So it is a fee that you're obligated to. The great news is that somebody else might pay for some part or all of it. So wouldn't that be wonderful? So I have not, and again, maybe because I have practiced it for as many years as I have, it's fairly intuitive in my speech and it just comes across that way. But we've got to, you've got to be comfortable with it, right? And it's one of those subjects that nobody likes to talk about, you know, because you don't want to scare these off because everybody's whispering in the buyer's ears, you don't have to pay for it.
Right.
Okay? I don't know, real estate's the only place I know where you could engage the services of somebody and not have to pay for it.
Yeah.
Which is ridiculous to me.
Yeah.
Right. In terms of the lenders, you know, I bet you I could go through that closing disclosure and find some things that are unusual from Mortgage Masters, whoever it was that made that comment.
Yeah.
And that will probably be my response, but that's a different issue.
No, I know. You don't get, it's like not their right to get involved in their opinion. That's their opinion.
Mhm.
You know, it doesn't seem, yeah. But anyway, that's why I was brushing my head because I was thinking of this morning and then explaining the 3%.
Mm-hmm.
Have to-
Listen, you hire me, I'm going to do a job, you owe me a fee.
Yeah.
The great news is what? Somebody else is likely to pay for some part of that or all of that. And even if they pay for some part of that, you get my entire suite of services for a reduced amount.
And I'm sure.
Why is that not okay?
I mean, I'm sure people in like a 6-month span could take people on so many like tours of homes. That's your time. That's your.
Go ask Michael Reddy how many offers he wrote, how many properties he showed, and offers he wrote for one client that he ultimately fired.
Was it 20 offers? And I think
9 offers before he got an accepted offer, and then the buyer blew it up at the last minute for no particular reason. At which point Michael turned around and made the business decision to say, you know, I appreciate the opportunity to work with you, but thank you, I don't think I can help you any further.
You're running in circles. Yeah.
Correct. And you will. And then you'll have the Zillow leads that you've never met before. You have one phone call today. You go out at 5:15 tonight, you write the offer, and boom,
Done.
it's done.
Yeah.
Right? So you got to take the good with the bad and all of this in your career, but you have to recognize that on average, you're likely to be spending anywhere from 8 to 15 hours of your time purely dedicated to that one buyer. What's that worth to you?
Right.
If it's worth nothing, then don't have them sign the agreement. Okay, but this is about communicating. You need to have that sense of self-worth about you and the services that you and this company provide for you, which includes not just the PAMs and, you know, on the buy side, it's really just PAM, not on the listing side, but it's the, you know, it's Crystal down front, it's the support you get from everybody in the office, It's the physical environment that you're in, because if you haven't been in another real estate office, this one is a little bit different
Yeah.
in terms of its physical environment.
Yeah.
What did our guest say, who's been in plenty of them and works?
She couldn't believe it. She wanted to come work here.
Is that the meeting we could have gone to today or no?
Hmm.
Oh, okay, good.
I heard,
No, go ahead.
I heard someone shit talking the design of our building while I was out at lunch just now.
Mhm.
But I almost gave her my card and said if you'd like to take a tour of the inside, we'd have to show you maybe like the inside better than the outside.
You should.
Then her
I
husband,
would.
but then her husband came along and he wouldn't know what I was talking about, and then he got stung by a bee, so it was a whole thing.
It's karma. That's, because if I were, that's what I would say, that's karma for talking bad about my building.
Yeah, so I just was like, I'm just gonna stay out of this one and let it handle itself.
Okay?
But, yeah, it was interesting because I guess the woman who either owned or worked at Learning Express was there, and this woman said, "Oh, didn't you work at Learning Express or didn't you have Learning Express?" She said, "Yeah." She's like, "I like your building a lot better than the building there now."
Yeah, the building that was built in 1890 that had
Falling
no
apart.
footings, was falling apart,
Green,
couldn't be,
right? Wasn't it green?
yes.
She was like, "It looks like something that should belong in California." I think the lady that was from Learning Express probably knows what our cards look like.
Yeah.
Because she looked at me and I looked at her and we kind of just like, and then she defended. She's like, "Well, it's not everyone's taste, but she spent a lot of money on it. I think it looks nice."
If she was actually the owner, she would have been she was thanking us. The actual owner,
Yeah.
Lillian helped them out of a really tough situation, so.
So it may have been that, and I think she defended us. That's not interesting.
Yeah.
But there is also your example of persistence. I approached her on behalf of Lillian to buy this land 7 years ago.
Wow.
And it was just through, and I mean, we were neighbors, so we always had a good relationship, but it was through that constant follow-up. I mean, it took us 6 years to acquire the land just to build the building.
Wow.
So, anyway.
And if you sit in your car at the end of the parking lot and just roll your window down, the amount of people that will walk by
And stop and
and stop and look at it, it's like 50-50 for good comments and bad comments, and all the bad comments are all Andover moms.
of course.
You could just tell, like,
I actually was leaving the other day and there was a man outside like looking at the building and I could tell he was curious what it looked like and I was leaving but I didn't know if I'm allowed to do this but I was gonna be like, "Do you want to tour the inside?" He just was very curious but then I'm like, I shouldn't probably go straight.
Yeah, I wouldn't be inviting people.
He was like an older, I don't know.
Clients, yes.
He was like horrible. I was like,
definitely talk to him and give him a card, but,
I don't have my
Oh, he's
tours
better.
yet.
oh yeah, they're ordered, yeah. So probably a week and a
Speaking
half.
of that, I know we're a little on topic, but last thing again. People walking by. When I first saw this building, I talked to Lucia about, but I think it's out of our ability based on what we found on Google. But when I first saw the building, first thing I did was Google it, and it has that thing off to the right-hand side where it usually says there it's a restaurant, whatever, directions, website, etc. The buttons. Ours does not have a website button. And if you go to add the website, it says cannot add this website because it redirects to another website. And I've tried all the URLs I know about. And then the part that Lucia's talking about there is if you try to claim ownership of this building, it asks for a code. So I don't know if there was a code within recent construction or if it was a code that was made 20 years ago,
Yeah,
or if we could find that or
Yeah.
somehow figure out a way
Right,
to
so
get a
we need to
website.
update that immediately because when you Google it, it's very hard to.
yeah,
It is kind of hard to find our website.
Well, no,
Yeah.
we were talking, we were
Grab
trying.
a Andover and it pops up.
No, but I think if you search Lillian Montalto, it's like hard to.
If you search Lillian Montalto or Lillian Montalto City Parties International, you cannot get to the website.
You
It's
can't.
8 things down on Google, and there's no website button.
Yeah,
Really?
Yeah.
yeah.
I've never had an issue with it.
Okay.
I'll look into that.
Exclusive right to
Search
buy agreement.
optimization.
Click on Luch today, hi guys.
No,
Yeah.
I was going, we worked on it together, but like, I think it's out of your hands, my hands.
It said that it was claimed by ownership of some Google account.
Right, that's what I mean. I don't want to mention it, see if maybe it's
It
in the
must have been
archive
from like
somewhere.
years and years ago.
Yeah, exactly. It could have been long
Yeah.
before you.
Please solve by tomorrow.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
Okay, the exclusive right to buy agreement. Questions?
Yeah, what should I have done differently? Just say for the 3%. Sorry, I listened to you. I just, like when you're negotiating the exact percentages, is there something I could have done better?
I don't negotiate the percentage. The percentage is 3%.
Okay. Got it.
Okay? You've got to be confident in your own mind to be able to say that. I think in your case, you've got the knowledge and you can answer a question as asked. I think you just have to do a better job of conveying that.
When you're explaining that paragraph, I think in the back of your head, you're thinking, oh, I hope they don't say something about negotiating. I hope they don't say something about negotiating. If you forget about the fact that they can even say that sentence
Yeah,
and just pretend that it's like you're walking into a store and that's your price and there's no negotiation, if you go into it with that mindset,
yeah.
I think it'll like come across differently.
Yeah.
I tried to really quickly go through the modification paragraph.
Mhm.
I'm not gonna, because then they'd be like, oh, well, yeah, let's modify the price.
Right.
If they ever ask what type of things can be modified in it, always do the date and say sometimes you need to extend the date. Don't even bring up
End the date or
the price.
negotiation
Yeah.
to a 4%.
Right.
I won't even bring up the.
If you get married, I'll change the name up front.
Okay. No, I was actually wondering, like, if they do ask, like, what things do you mean by that, like, what to say?
Mhm. But again, try to make your presentations as much about asking questions as it is about conveying information. It's really about conveying the information and asking the question, qualifying through a question that they understand it. And so you have to walk away knowing that they understand it. Okay? So when we last met, we spent a whole bunch of time talking about the offer and dates and so on and so forth. What questions did you have from that?
Eric, I had a question.
Go for it.
So, and this came up in like one of my test questions when I was studying. It said if a buyer puts in an offer to purchase and has the, say it was on Thursday and they made it Friday at 5 p.m. was the, the offer deadline. And then they pulled out Thursday night. So they put it in Thursday morning, they pulled out Thursday night. It said, like, what was that? And so I ended up getting it wrong because I didn't realize that it was void, because I had said that they could still go through with the contract because that it was until it was 5 p.m. on Wednesday. But is it only if it's accepted? Does that make sense? I could read the exact question if that makes sense.
So, yeah, why don't you read the exact question and the answers, and if you don't mind, that would be helpful.
Yeah, no problem.
Because remember, it's a validity question, right? This offer or
Yes.
statement, this offer is good until such and such a date and time, and until something changes that, yes, it would be valid. And at the occurrence of that time on that date, it becomes invalid unless otherwise done, and I would say done in writing.
I always get confused with the void and the voidable.
So, I can help. Okay.
Go ahead.
If someone is like signing a contract in duress, or like someone's under the influence or something like that, then it's voidable. If someone's breaking the law, it's always void. I know that.
Correct.
Those took me a while to memorize for the test because it's like such little,
It's a nuance.
differences. But that helped me a lot because it's like, it kind of makes sense. Well, it could, and another thing that surprised me is if you're like 16 and you like sign a contract to buy a home, it's valid, but it's voidable. I always thought it would be void, but it's voidable
Well, until
on
it's,
the test.
Till it's challenged, right?
Right.
yeah.
But it
so
was
like
valid, yeah. Well, for the test, you just need to know it's voidable, not void.
But what if it says, like, because I had a question like that and it was voidable, valid, void, like, would you click valid?
I would click, voidable.
Okay,
What's the
so
question, Julie?
it said Sarah makes an offer on Tuesday with an expiration date of Wednesday at 5 p.m. She withdraws the offer Tuesday night, citing a change in circumstances. The offer is A, valid until Wednesday at 5 p.m., B, void, C, may be enforceable by a court of law, or D, none of the above.
it's void because they withdrew it.
Right, but it's a poorly written question because it says she withdrew it, right? What does it say specifically?
It says she withdrew, citing a change in circumstances.
Right, but it didn't say it was withdrawn in writing. And again, you can do it, you get into the issue of, okay, my offer is no longer valid. Okay, well, if it's not in writing, now we're gonna have the proverbial pissing contest of he said, she said, and so on and so forth. So I understand why they said it's void. If I were writing the question, I would clarify that it was withdrawn in writing by the parties, but maybe they're specifically trying to do that to trick you.
So I guess my other question is then, if they switched the question around and said the offer was accepted, then it can't be void. Then it would have to be enforced by a court of law. Or I mean, I guess the answer would change, but if it was accepted, would it be different?
So there's what I would refer to as the theoretical and the pragmatic part of that answer. The theoretical is that an offer's made, it's good until tomorrow at 5. The seller signs the offer sometime within that period. That's an accepted offer, right? Now, one could argue that, well, wait a second, what I was referring to is that the buyer could then come back and say, well, I withdrew it. You know, my agent was supposed to call you and they didn't call you, or my agent called you and said I withdrew it, but if there's nothing in writing, there's no way to document that, right? So that's, in theory, you'd still have an acceptable offer and you have to go through some type of process. The pragmatic perspective is that I've never seen a seller be able to enforce a contract because, especially if it's in Massachusetts, right, almost every single offer contemplates the signing of a purchase and sale. The buyer would get to the purchase and sale. They probably wouldn't do a home inspection if they had one, and B, they'd get to the purchase and sale and just not sign that. Then what do you have? You have a contract, but now how is the seller really going to enforce that?
Right. Okay.
The only way the seller's going to be able to enforce that would be to do the following. I'm going to notify you, I'm going to enforce the contract that you signed, go through the process, get to the closing date, and call the offer or call the transaction at the registry of deeds so that it's on record that the seller was ready, willing, and able. What's the buyer's response going to be? Do whatever you want. I didn't do the home inspection. I didn't sign the purchase and sale. I didn't go through the financing commitment. And now you're going to get into a court spat, and there's going to be questions about what was the buyer's intent, who did what in good faith. And now you get into these very nebulous legal concepts that are going to determine whether the contract was voidable, voided, whatever the case may be. So that's why I'm always going to teach you and insist on anything that you do, any modifications to a contract or in writing and signed, or they're communicated in writing, please don't communicate in text if you don't have to, right? If you're going to communicate things, send it in an email because you can capture it. It's much more easy to search and make sure that it's documented versus trying to do that with a text. You might, like what I normally do is I'll write the email, send the email, and then I'll send a text and say, check your email, please, right? Because there is a contingency. No offense to any of you, because you're all a few years younger than me. You're more apt to text. I'm not. I will text. I'll respond by all day on text, but I don't want that. Please don't use text as a substitute for communicating terms and conditions. Just like the transaction I was telling you about the other day on John Street, right? The counter offer came to me by text. Not a big fan of that from the agent. Is it acceptable? Okay. You know, and again, we skirt a little bit of the law in common practice in terms of instead of me writing out my seller's counter offer and having them sign it and presenting it to the buyer, which is what we should be doing, we basically go and say, okay, here's the seller's counter offer. I'll usually reduce it in writing to make sure that everybody's clear on what the counteroffer was, but it's not signed by the seller. And so we skirt around the law a little bit in terms of that because it's not really, it wouldn't pass the sniff test of what? The statute of frauds, which means everything has to be in writing. But again, as long as the final agreement is in writing, the final agreed upon terms are in writing, and both parties sign it, you're good. What constitutes a counteroffer, since we're talking about offers?
Has to be in writing.
Okay. I would prefer it be in writing. Again, customary practice dictates or will allow you to have a conversation with an agent. You know, as much as I didn't like the counteroffer from the agent in text, it's acceptable as part of common practice. If he even picked up a phone and just said, here's here it is verbally, that is acceptable common practice. It doesn't bind the two parties, even if we said agreed, it doesn't bind the two parties, but it's a way of communicating it for sure.
You want conditions in there, if there are extra conditions or any conditions?
Explain a little further, please.
So if it's it's kind of like when you were talking about the lead paint and that the house that you had there, how they came back with a counteroffer, like if you're gonna not have the lead paint inspected, then will you sign a disclosure on this? So like, here are terms, here's the counteroffer and terms that go along with it. So I guess different terms if you're not going to keep the same terms.
Okay, so I agree with that. So let me put out an example. So you have a full-fledged offer with all the details in it, and the seller comes back and says, we'll accept your offer. Can you just change the purchase and sale from Friday to Monday? Is that a counteroffer?
Yeah.
Let's assume it's in writing too and signed by the seller just for the heck of it.
Yeah, I mean, you could change anything in the counter offer, right?
Right. So the minute you change one element of an offer that's been presented, that is a counteroffer. It means the prior offer has now been voided and it's no longer valid. And there's this new offer on the table, no matter how slight the change. If there's even just one change, that's a counteroffer.
I had a question when I was studying that kind of presented that, where
Okay.
someone set an offer and then they technically counter-offered, and then they said that a different party offered them more, but
Yep.
they currently had a counter-offer with someone else.
Okay.
Are they able to back out of that and accept the higher offer?
Yeah, because they didn't accept an offer yet. You could have 3 different people with offers going back and forth with counters at the same time.
So
They're
let's
not
talk,
trying to storm.
So let's talk about that. When a seller gets presented an offer, what are the seller's 4 possible responses? Let's call it offer response. 1, 2, 3, 4. Because it's the same 4 responses that a buyer can give on a counteroffer. What are they?
Acceptance.
No, so a rejection, right?
Oh.
Sorry, Julie, what were you saying?
Sorry, acceptance.
Acceptance, right? Yep, I'll take it. Okay, third one. So,
I don't know what you,
Counter.
counter, oh, yeah.
so acceptance, rejection, some type of counter, right? Counter or, negotiated. Right, what's the 4th?
Would be highest and best, a call for highest and best, or is that not?
Well, how would you do that if I'm a buyer and I'm providing a counteroffer to the seller? Wouldn't be highest and best. So these are the types of responses you have. I can reject your offer, Jessica, thank you, but the seller is not inclined to take your offer. Jessica, I'm accepting your buyer's offer. Jessica, we like most of what your buyer has to offer us. However, we'd like to counter on some of these terms or that terms. What's the 4th?
Like
Would it be creating a totally new counter offer?
no response.
Oh.
So for my family, feud.
Technically, no response is
Mind
response.
blown.
That's why it gets 0 value. Of course it is.
No response. Indifferent.
Okay. What would no response sound like?
Cricket.
Silence. Right, silence, right? Okay, so it's possible. So imagine, Jessica, you write an offer
Okay.
on my listing. For whatever reason, I present it to the seller, and the seller chooses not to respond. What happens? What happens to that offer?
Dead.
Eventually, when it expires, it's dead.
Yeah.
There you go. Once it expires, it's dead.
Then you'll, Would anyone ever put in an offer that doesn't have an expiration date?
In theory, it's possible, but there's a danger to that. Okay? Here's how you can be a danger, because sometimes you get these buyers that, you know, who have missed out on 92 properties, 2 properties come on the market in the same day. They like both, they'd be willing to put an offer on both. One has an offer deadline of Monday at 5, the second has an offer deadline of Monday at 9. Okay? Eric, I want to put an offer in, I'd like to put an offer on both. Do you really want to do that? Because what happens if you put 2 offers in at the same time, what happens if both sellers sign?
You have to pay for it.
You have to pay for
Now you're buying 2 properties, because you're under contract for 2 properties. So taking what you asked was, could you not put an expiration? You could, it's not an element that makes it a contract or not, right? The expiration of the contract itself, or the proposal, if you will. But if you had an open-ended, what would be to stop a seller from, you put in an offer today, 5 days later, you're not paying attention, the seller accepts it, but now you might have changed something.
Could it be contingent on the other offer that you submitted not getting signed before?
Could be, but tell me what seller's gonna say, right? How are you gonna, it's all about how are you gonna manage that process.
Mhm.
My big issue is that if you have an open-ended offer, you have a potentially open-ended acceptance process. One, why are you keeping it open? What's the value? What's the strategy behind that? Maybe there is one I haven't thought of in years, but it makes it open to the fact that at any time that seller can sign it.
Yeah, because you could buy a different property and move in, and then they could sign it like a month later.
In theory, right? And then you'd be theoretically on the hook for it. Okay? But let me tell you about how you manage this, because you have to be able to say, okay, when I'm writing offers or when I'm negotiating offers for my sellers, I got to know what each of these means, and can I leverage these to my advantage? And, you know, and now you get into strategy in terms of how you're negotiating, right? Everything becomes a strategy. First of all, everything in the offer is what? Negotiable. Everything. The dates are negotiable. The deposits are negotiable. The values are negotiable. The language in the freaking offer is negotiable, quite honestly. So everything's open on the table for negotiation. What happens when you get a rejection? So the seller comes back to you and says, your offer is rejected.
Can you make a better offer?
Doesn't prevent you from resubmitting.
Right.
My response when I got that on 91 John Street early in the week is, can you help me understand why they're rejecting it? Because they don't like the price. Okay, they don't like the price. Is it that or is it something else? What's the price that they like? Because if you tell me, Mr. Agent, that you're at 520, we started at 590, you came down to 509. If you didn't like my higher price at 500 and you're rejecting my offer, why didn't you do that when I was at 490? So that tells me, just based on experience, that it wasn't, yes, it was about the price, but it was really about something else. In that case, it was lead paint. Nobody will ever admit it, but it was about lead paint. Okay? So and even with sellers, right? You are going to get a seller. Let's reverse the roles. I'm the listing agent for 91 John Street. I get an offer for 490. I present it to the seller, and the seller says, I want to reject it. Here's my standard issue response. Why? Somebody took the time to write an offer. You don't have to like it. I'm not asking you to like it. I'm not asking you to accept it. I might ask you to accept it. Depends on the situation. But the reality is why do you want to reject it? Somebody took the time to see your property. They sat down and wrote an offer. They wrote a check. They've expressed more interest than everybody else has expressed so far. Why do you want to reject it? Because I'm insulted. Do you want to sell your house? Do you not want to sell your house? Right? Does it mean that, as I like to say, it doesn't matter where the offer starts. It matters where the offer ends. Wouldn't be the first time we got a low ball offer and we ultimately negotiated up to full price because somebody was fishing for it. So for me, rejection it's rarely seen, and it should be rarely seen. There's really not if you're trying to send a message, if you're on the listing side and you're trying to send a very specific message, like go away, don't ever bother me again, go ahead, reject the offer. But if you're trying to sell your house, listen, counter back at full price.
Yeah.
Right? What message is that going to send to the buyer that is off 30 or 40 grand? You're way off the mark. What if you came back off of full price just a little? You're willing to negotiate. You think coming off the full price tells them you're willing to negotiate, but you're still way off, right? So how you respond, inclusive of that word, is going to be very important to how you negotiate, and you've got to recognize this. Most agents, when they hear the word rejection, they say, okay, I'm picking up all my crayons and I'm going home, and that's it. Why? There's no reason to. Right? Make them rejected 2 or 3 or 4 times, right? And even if you get rejected, to your point, it doesn't stop a buyer from resubmitting. So in the case of 91 John, we said, okay, it's about the price. Is it really? What if we remove the lead inspection? Does the price become a little bit better? I mean, Mr. Agent, you just told me your strategy is to lower the price to a price below what you're already being offered. So are you really telling me the truth, right? So you have to be very aware of what the discussions are being. That's in self-explanatory, counteroffer, again, anything, the slightest change, even to one date, represents a voided offer to be replaced with a new offer, even though it's, yes, sir.
But it's still considered a counteroffer. The seller could just say, no, we're countering at what we originally asked for. That's still a counter, even though.
That's still a counteroffer, right? Rejection is just saying no.
So basically, it's still on the table, but it remains as it is.
Right, so you're the buyer, okay? You just placed an offer on my listing at $490 and it's $520. When I say your offer is rejected, and that's all I say, what do you think?
Let it get rejected.
What's that?
Well, I have to just move on.
Okay, and now instead of saying rejected, I say, I'm countering back at $519,900. What does that tell you?
Basically, still willing to work with you, but the price is pretty firm.
Right, or maybe I'm just I'm a seller that's stuck on my price.
Mm-hmm.
Or what if I come back and say, you know what, I'll counter back you at $517,500. I'm not as stuck on the price as I am by giving you a full price offer, full price counter offer, but I'm willing to have a conversation. Now, I don't let the numbers themselves in those particular cases speak for themselves. I usually say, hey, listen, they're rejecting an offer. If my seller is so insistent that reject the offer, the way I explain it to them is, hey, by rejecting this offer, you're telling these people, go pound sand, you don't want to ever hear from them again. Is that what you really want to say? I've never explained that to a buyer because none of my sellers have ever said that. But they said rejection, but I've gotten them to come off of it. When I go back and say, hey, it's $519,900 to the buyer or to the buyer's agent, hey, the seller's countering back at full price. You're just too far off for them to even want to be able to have a discussion. Okay? If I come back at $517,500, hey, we're countering at this number. The seller is willing to have a conversation, but they're not willing to even come close to what you've offered. Now, rejection, full price, counteroffer, just under full price counter. Don't you see how we're getting different shades of gray for sure? But what's your reaction as a buyer to all three is very different, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you have to be mindful of how you package those counteroffers or even how you present the offers. Make sense? But no response looks like this. Hey, Eric, I submitted an offer to you. What's going on? Oh, I haven't heard from the seller yet. Do they want to sell the house? I have no idea. I haven't heard from the seller yet. Right? And what you have to guard against is to make sure that you're not taking this stuff personally, because it's never about you. Okay? And you're going to get a lot of agents that are going to snicker and sneer at you and not know what they're talking about. Luch, tell us about your experience with the listing agent on Waverly.
She's awful. She's Redfin, so she's awful. I was trying to present the offer in person, or not even necessarily in person, but just directly to the sellers. And she kept going back and forth with me. And after like 7 or 8 emails, so basically she was saying it's not common practice to present in person. And I was saying, well, maybe it's not common practice at Redfin, but we practice it commonly here. And no, I literally said that, Gary, like threw that her way. And I forget what her response back to that was. But then I basically said, I said my buyer would probably be willing to, waive that, not have to present it directly to the seller if we were the only offer. But since we believe we're in a multiple offer situation, that's why we would really like to do it direct to the seller. And she replied back that you're the only offer. And this was before we actually submitted the offer, so it would have given us the ability to tweak it if we wanted to, but we submitted the offer as it was, and we ended up being the only offer. So, yeah, it worked out.
And she told you that you were the only offer.
Yeah. What was the details? Like how long was it in the market with the property?
It was on the market for like 4 days. We went to there was an open house this past Saturday and Sunday. I went to it Saturday, my buyer went to it Sunday, and then we wrote the offer Monday, had it due for Tuesday, the deadline for it, and then.
Did they just accept it, or did they count it?
Yeah, no, they accepted it. It was 5,000 over asking. So it was a pretty good offer. But yeah.
Okay. Any other questions about offers?
So Eric, I guess like in Lucha's situation, when you have, and like people are putting more money than what's actually offered, like you said, $5,000 over, how do you have those conversations? If they're rejected, is it usually just like, we got a higher offer, or the seller accepted something else?
Who's my conversation? Who am I and who's my conversation with? Sorry.
You're the buyer's agent, and so the listing agent is telling you, like, so you submitted an offer to me that was $5,000 over asking, and I said, nope, they don't want it.
Okay, why is that?
They got multiple offers.
I go into question mode because why? If I'm bringing you up, you've said to the world that I'm offering this property for X.
Mm-hmm.
I would think that if I bring you an offer at X or X plus something, that should not only get your attention, it should probably sway you in the direction of accepting the offer. So what is it about the offer that you don't like? So that I can try to address that with my buyer if that's what you're looking for. More importantly, give me a counter offer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I have certainly had sellers in multiple offer situations in particular not take the highest priced offer because why? Because the other terms and conditions were more important. Listen to what Joanna said in the meeting this morning, which was, hey, I listed my property on 8 Elm. I was overwhelmed with the response. We got a cash offer that was $40,000 less than the asking price, but it was a cash offer, so no financing contingency, and there was no inspections. My sellers took it and ran. They better take it and run because the house needed a little bit of work. Would you say?
A lot more than a little.
Right. So the house probably needed 50, 80, or 100 grand worth of work. Right? But there's a case of where the agent, Joanna, took the opportunity to educate the sellers about, hey, here's what this means to you. Yes, it's less dollars in your pocket, but it's a hell of a lot less aggravation, and there's no contingencies at all.
So on the flip side, if I'm the selling agent and I'm asking you, what can that, I guess, without us getting in trouble, what can we say? So if, the buyer's agent's asking us questions, what can we say? Like, could you say, well, I got a cash offer, or no, you're not allowed to say that? I guess that's
the terms and conditions of an offer, of any offer, are always considered confidential, right?
Okay.
Now, when I'm a list agent and I get an offer and I share that with the seller, and if we're in a multiple offer situation, my job when I'm a listing agent is to say to the seller, here's the offer, let me present it to you, and here's what this means. Let's talk about possible responses, particularly in a multiple offer situation. Because remember the 4 responses, right? You can give any one of those 4 responses to any one of the individual offers that have been presented, or you can go back to all of them with the same response. So oftentimes what I do in a multiple offer situation is let's say I have 3 offers. I look at each of the offers and I kind of go back and counter each of them individually. I might come back and say, hey, seller's asking for highest and best, but let me give you some guidance about your offer. Jessica, your offer is not the highest offer. And while it's not always about price, your offer is not the highest offer. Jonathan, appreciate it. My seller is countering back at highest and best. You might want to consider changing some dates to this, because these are the seller's preferred dates. Madison, your offer highest and best for your buyer. We're countering back at highest and best. You might want to consider removing the home inspection contingency, because there are other offers that have done that, right? And so now I've gone back to all 3 of you with a more specific counter that's specific to your individual. But what am I doing? I'm doing it, I'm doing that to do it in the best interest of my seller, but more importantly, I've gotten my seller's approval to do that, right? It's never your decision to do things. It's your expertise to lay out to your seller, in that case, here are your options, and here's the strategy I recommend. Get them to sign off on that strategy.
So the seller can share whatever information from the offer if
Correct.
they want.
Yeah.
It's just up to them.
Right. And when you get a listing sign, you get something called the offer presentation and notification document that's signed. We're probably the only office that has it. That document says 2 things. One, it says only a member of the Lillian Montalto Signature Properties office can present offers to our sellers. And they sign that in writing, which means what? When the likes of Luciano come to me and say, I want to present my offer in person, I'm sorry, my seller has specifically put in writing that they do not want that. And it's already signed and sealed. In his case, he could have pushed the issue with them, but at what point, to what cost do you push the issue?
And that's what I kept saying. I kept saying, you know, she said it's not common practice. I said, maybe not for you, but for us it is. I said, if you don't have a signed thing by the sellers saying that they're not accepting offers directly to them, then you know, I'm allowed to do that based off of, was it MLS rules?
Yeah, the MLS rules and regulations. Again, most people don't. You all should read the rules and regulations once, just so that you know what you're dealing with. I do expect you to have a running knowledge of them, but it's the MLS rules and regulations that give you that right to present that offer in person. I've done it a couple of times. Here are some very positive responses that I've gotten from it. One, the first one I ever did, we were not the prevailing offer. I got a call 3 days later from the listing agent saying, hey, first offer that we accepted, they went away. The seller appreciated that you took the time to communicate your buyer's offer over. They'd be willing to pick up your buyer's offer without going back to market. Had I not made that presentation in person, I doubt we would have had that opportunity, and we probably would have been in a multiple offer situation again, and certainly lesser chances of getting it. The other one, which I really had a lot of fun with, was a property over in North Andover for a client that was on a multifamily property, and I asked to make the presentation, and I was not the only one. There was a stream of people out in front of this house. I had to make an appointment to go in to make it, and as I sat down, you were the seller, you were the broker, and there were 3 offers, all face up, right in front of me. I got caught reading them all. Because then they turned them over. I presented my offer. I walked out, called my client, and said, hey, just want to let you know, I presented the offer in person as I said I would. Here's what I learned about it. There are 3 other offers. You're $10,000 to the lowest one. So that means you either have to come up $10,000 to compete with the lowest one, but you're probably going to have to come up $25,000 or $30,000 to prevail. What do you want to do? I'm out. Okay, so there is value in presenting offers. Again, you're trying to make things personable and get your offer to stand out as just one more way to do that. Okay, when you submit offers, you should be submitting other documents. Here's what the offer packet that you submit contains, so get your pens ready. Okay, should be the completed offer to purchase with buyer signatures. So it's the offer itself, buyer signed offer. okay? What else? It's the buyer's pre-approval. Where possible, sometimes it's not. The pre-approval should be property-specific and offer-specific. What do I mean by that? It has the address of the property on it, and it's it mirrors the price of the offer itself.
Property and what specific, I'm sorry.
Price specific. So if you're gonna offer 500, if your buyer's offering 500,000, it should say 500,000. Now, again, you have to be aware of that. That's not an absolute. If you're putting in an escalation clause and the escalation clause takes you up to 520, pre-approval should probably say 520. Okay? I don't like to tip the buyer's hand. Again, the buyer's motivation, timing, and value are what? Confidential. The pre-approval does what? It indirectly gives the seller more information. So if you send them a pre-approval for $600 on a $500,000 house, what's the seller going to look like? Hey, they can afford more. Does it happen often? I don't think so, but just don't open yourself up to that. You need a copy of the offer deposit check. Okay? Typically made payable to the listing office. If there aren't instructions on MLS or in MLS, make it as a default, have them make it out to the listing office. You are sending a copy, not the original. That said, could it be a strategy to deliver a live check? I worked with a client about 2 months ago. We were going to see properties up in Guilford, New Hampshire. It's an hour and a half away. We pre-wrote the offer, pre-signed the offer because we knew we were going to be in a multiple offer situation. I had them bring the live check because had we submitted the offer, knowing we were in a multiple offer situation, I wanted the agent to have everything. So that if they accepted, they could immediately deposit the check. Again, it's a nuance with a difference, but the copy of the offer check, please make sure that the routing number, if you're going to be transmitting an electronic copy of the check, please have your client block out the routing and account number. Okay? Why do we do that? Because there's an awful lot of fraud in there. Okay? I am the victim of identity fraud. Somebody somewhere got a picture of a check that I signed on my personal account, this is years ago, and they basically recreated it and my signature and took $5,000 out of my account. Not very fun.
So if you're delivering the actual check, it doesn't apply, right?
You don't have to worry about a scammer getting it
Right.
through email.
Now, when you deliver checks, whether it's at the original, whether it's at the time of offer or you're surrendering it because the offer has been accepted, take a copy with you and have whoever you're giving it to sign a copy that they've received it. Why? Because under Old Car, the accounting kicks in, and that's you have to have a full accounting of where those funds were and who accepted them and so on and so forth. If you have the buyer deliver it, then, or if you deliver it and put it in an overnight Dropbox, then have the listing agent send you an email saying, we have received the check. Okay, so buyer signed offer, pre-approval, copy of the offer deposit, copy of your buyer signed Massachusetts mandatory real estate licensing consumer relationship disclosure form showing the relationship of buyer agent. So I'm just going to write state agency. That's all I need here. If you want me to write it out, I'm going to have a guest person write it all out for me. Okay.
Oh, I think I can do that.
I bet you can.
Can't even
Don't
spell
tempt me.
Massachusetts.
Okay, so offer, pre-approval, copy of the checks, state agency. What else should we include in there?
MLS.
MLS, printout of the MLS. I prefer that you do what's called the full printout of MLS because it also shows the compensation that the agent is offering to, that office is offering to our office. Okay? Good comp. Okay, what else?
if there's a letter from the seller, from the buyer.
Letter. Now, I'm gonna teach you, hopefully you'll listen. Remember that when I get an offer, am I usually giving the seller a copy of the check? Probably not. Am I giving them a copy of the state agency? Probably not. It's all part of one package, sure, I'm sending it over. But there are agents out there that if you do not include your letter as part of the offer, as an addendum within your offer, they may not present it. How often does that happen? Well, 3 weeks ago, I was in the office and listened to an agent tell Lillian that it is her office's policy not to present offer letters from buyers to sellers. Sounds like a violation of law to me, but we're not going to get into it. And again, are you going to, so when Lillian said, can you please confirm that the letter got presented? She said, we don't present the letters. Now we're going to get into, was it part of the offer, was it not part of the offer? If your buyers write an offer, label it addendum and give it a number and reference it in the offer. Then you know it's going to be presented. What else?
Any inspections or anything like that?
Inspections. We haven't done any inspections yet.
If you have like an addendum for the contingencies.
Yeah, so this will be, the offer should include any addendums. How about we just do that now? Okay. What else? Okay, so there's a couple things. Number one, and I'm going to asterisk them because they may or may not be available. One would be a seller's disclosure, which is seller's disclosure. What does that mean? Well, typically it can be referred to as there's a couple different flavors of them. There's a statement of property condition. There's the seller's disclosure of property. There's a couple pre-made forms out by the different boards that a seller might fill out what they know or don't know about their home. And they may share that. Is that a requirement of law that they disclose things about their property in writing?
If they live there. They don't need that form if they didn't live there, but.
Okay. So I go to put my house on the market. I've lived in the house for 20 years. I don't want to do a seller's description of property. What do you tell me as my listing agent?
It's smart to do one.
Okay. I agree with that. Why is it smart for me to do one?
Because it basically gets everything out there so that the person doesn't have to come back with a million questions.
Okay. It gives the appearance of transparency, which is what it is, which means it avoids the opposite of what? That we're hiding something.
Yeah.
Okay. 91 John Street. Hey, Mr. Listing Agent, I noticed the seller didn't have a seller's description of property. Is there any, no, they just didn't want to fill one out. Okay, would they be open to filling one out if my buyers requested it? I don't know, I'd have to ask. Okay? I never got the answer to the question. We submitted the offer, we got it accepted. Now I know why he didn't fill it out, because there was a lot of shit in that house that they should have disclosed that probably would have changed my buyer's mind prior to making an offer. But that's what happened, so my buyers have walked away. So seller's description of property. So remember that Massachusetts, here's the operative point. Massachusetts is a voluntary state. New Hampshire, when you get your license, is a voluntary state. What do I mean by that? There is no requirement under law other than state and federal law relating to lead paint that a seller has to disclose anything about the property in advance. Okay, there are other states that require sellers to produce one of these, period. Yes.
So I always thought that disclosure was required by the seller. So is the disclosure just as a buyer's agent, if we find out something about the property that's wrong with it, we have to tell our client, right? That's the disclosure that's required.
If you have knowledge, firsthand knowledge of latent defects, yes, you have to disclose it. So wouldn't a listing agent, quite honestly.
But the seller doesn't need to tell
The seller has no obligation under the law to disclose anything about the property.
They're not licensed agents.
They're not licensed
So
agents.
like they knew the foundation was in really bad condition, they only say anything to their agent, but if the agent finds out, the agent would have to tell them.
Correct, as long as the agent has firsthand knowledge. And now you're getting into shades of gray. What constitutes firsthand knowledge? If I send the agent because you'll see this, you send the agent a home inspection report that shows all this stuff that's wrong, firsthand knowledge from an inspector, you get some agents that will refuse to accept the report or refuse to open up the email.
That's why,
They don't wanna know.
that's why with lead paint inspections, a lot of people don't want in the offer written in that they could do a lead paint inspection, because then if it comes back testing positive, then they know about it, so now they have to change it. Now they have to remediate it.
That's an ethical issue in my humble, that's a whole
And-
different ballpark.
Uh,
But, so seller's disclosure, again, is voluntary. Sellers don't have to fill them out. We, as a company, quote unquote, require them. But again, if they don't want to fill one out, they don't have to. What they do have to do under law is, if asked a specific question, they have to answer it. And if they lie, that's called fraud. But again, you have to go through this process to get to an accusation of fraud, much less proving one. Good luck. It's a lot of time, money, and effort. What else would you include if available, if applicable? How about that?
Like,
Yeah.
I guess you could just say like anything on the attached to MLS that,
And then I'm just gonna write miscellaneous. I generally prefer that if the agent has taken the time to put information out there on MLS, other than stuff that's specific to the agent, what would be specific to the agent? Hey, here's the offer process, here's what you need to submit as part of the offer, or some type of escrow policy or whatnot. I would take all of the miscellaneous documents, if they're site plans, if they're tax records or any of that, I'd put that all as part of the package. And then when I send this out for electronic signature, I'm sending the buyer everything, and I'm having them, with the exception of their pre-approval, with the exception of their copy of their offer, everything else, they're either signing or initialing, every single page. When you have somebody sign something, you need to make sure, especially when it's an electronic, that their name is printed and there's a date. Okay? Don't have people just sign, because there are people like me that you cannot read their signatures. So anytime somebody is required to sign on a signature line, make sure that their name is either pre-printed or gets printed as part of the electronic document signing process and dated. Okay? To me, this is what I refer to as an offer packet. This is everything that you want to submit. Now, why do you want to go to the pains of having all of this together? What message does it send the listing agent? This buyer's serious. So serious that they looked at everything, they've signed everything, they're ready to go. There's no reason to, you don't have to come back and ask them for anything. They already know what to do. Because I can't tell you how many times I get offers, and this is all I get. Sometimes I'll get that. More often than not, I'll get that. I never get this. I won't get this unless I harp on it. And we put instructions in MLS saying, send all this stuff, and we still have to beg, borrow, and plead for it from the agents. So it makes a statement when you provide an offer packet. What else do? I take this offer packet and I write a nice little email to the listing agent, and I say, dear Mr. List Agent, please see my buyer's attached offer. My buyers are, and then I just list out all the relevant salient points that I think are going to help make a difference that need to be highlighted. They have nothing to sell. They can be flexible to the buyer's, to the seller's preferred closing date. It's a cash offer, whatever it might be. I use that cover email to kind of give them the high level talking points that they hopefully will give to their seller. They may not. I send that offer over as a high priority email requesting a read receipt. In the bottom of that email, I have the same line in the bottom of every email. Please reply to this email to confirm receipt of the offer. As soon as I hit send, then what do? I pick up the phone and call them and say, I just sent you an email. Can you please review the email? It's a great offer, blah, 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 blah. I might tell them about it. Sometimes the agents want to talk about it. Sometimes they don't. You might get a voicemail. Leave the voicemail. Same thing. Hey, I just sent you over an offer, blah, 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 blah. If I didn't get them live, I will also text them. If it's an agent that I've been in communication with or I've have experience with, and I know they prefer text versus a call, okay, then I'll text them and say I just sent it over. Okay. In the era of multiple offers and deadlines, make sure you send that offer over accordingly and you get confirmation that it was received, because the last thing you want to do is to forget to send the offer, or send the offer, but it never gets received on the other end. Make sense? Okay, we're gonna get into lead paint next, maybe today, we'll start it. But let's talk about some of the other disclosure type things. Who knows what asbestos is? Any questions on an offer packet? Again, when you're representing a buyer, whenever you're doing this, you want to try and put forth the narrative and create a positive narrative about your buyer. And the more that you can articulate that, the more you make it about the buyer and you make it more personal and less transactional. And remember, we are in the ecosystem. Okay? So seller's disclosure of property is not a requirement under law. Sellers can voluntarily fill one out. They are not required by law to fill one out. But let's talk about some of the other things you're going to come across in your career frequently, especially in New England. What is radon?
It comes from the ground.
Comes from the ground.
It's like that natural gas, or it's
Comes from granite.
granite.
It comes more from granite.
It is the result of decomposing granite. And granite doesn't decompose very easily, just so you know.
And it's fixable, I think.
Okay, but what is it? Describe it to me if I'm a consumer, because you're going to get asked about it.
It's toxic, is it toxic?
It's a known carcinogen, which means it causes cancer. In what form does it come in?
Yes.
And liquid. And I say that because it's the gas infusing within the liquid. So it can be, I describe it as the following. In its natural state, it is an odorless, colorless gas. The room could be filled with it right now and you would not know. Okay? It's an issue because why? It comes from decomposing granite. It comes from the ground up. And it's a known, long exposures, it's a known carcinogen. In the Andovers in particular, I would tell you that about every other house has radon, right? When they talk about ledge, what is ledge? When somebody says there's ledge on the lot, lots of rocks, lots of rocks, big rock formations. And where are you? We're just south of what? The Granite State. Why do you think they call it the Granite State? Off granite. Okay, so there's lots of radon around. Okay, how does it get into a house? What's that?
Through the foundation usually?
Through the foundation. How is the foundation constructed? I know this sounds like a silly question. So you dig a hole, and the foundation consists of what components?
Poured cement.
Well, it's made of concrete, that's fine. It's made up of walls and something called a slab. Okay? They are poured independently of each other, which means that the floor, right, in this diagram, this floor is poured separately from these walls. These walls are attached all the way around. It's a continuous pour based on the forms. But your floor is generally poured after the fact. So there's always going to be, with rare exception, unless it's designed to be poured a certain way, there's always going to be a gap between the wall itself and the slab of the foundation, creating what? A space for air to come in, okay? The way homes are constructed these days, less so in the distant past. Today, there will be anywhere from 2 to 6 or more inches of crushed gravel under the slab. So the slab sits on top of this bed of gravel. Okay? So what happens when you have that kind of construction, and now I've got these beams that run along the walls. Forget the fact that if you ever walk in an unfinished basement, you see a crack in the floor, a settling crack. or maybe there's some other cracks, but settling cracks, that too offers us an opportunity for radon to seep up. Now, what happens in houses is houses today, think about, have you heard about they're no longer called the stretch codes, but the building codes make for these, what are referred to as tight houses. Does everybody know what that is? A house is supposed to breathe, right? There's an intake, the air comes in and comes out. The houses are so tight now that it actually creates what's referred to as negative air pressure. I'm getting way too technical, but negative air pressure. So it's literally sucking air out from the ground through these cracks. So if you have radon, which is an odorless, colorless gas, what's happening? It's just by virtue of the construction, the house is sucking air out from underneath the foundation. Okay, so that's how radon gas gets into a house. What's the remediation? The typical remediation is they'll go in, they'll bore a hole in the slab, they'll do a smoke test to figure out is there gravel underneath or not, enough to be able to draw air out of it. They'll put a pipe that goes up the side of the foundation wall on the inside, pops out over the top of the foundation wall here, and then runs all the way up on the outside of the house above the roof line. Pre-construction now, a lot of what the builders are doing are building that in what's called a passive radon system, just the piping that goes from the basement all the way up. But what happens in radon is what they do is they install a continuous running fan. I did my home inspection in April of 2000, and we found radon levels that were too high. We installed a radon remediation system, not unlike what I just described at the time. It was $800. The fan's still running 20 years later. What's the fan doing? It's creating the suction from the foundation to go up through that tube versus letting it come in through the cracks and everywhere else. If I had cracks in the floor, they'd seal it just so that you don't get seepage, but that's what it's doing. It's just basically extracting it out. Yes.
Can radon like come and go on a property as well? Like,
It can change from day, the amount, it can change from day to day, but it's listed as, I think Curaleaf, I forget what the exact, PCL, whatever that, Madame Piro, whatever her name is, that figured it all out back in the day. That's radon gas. Okay? Your buyer says, what's radon? All I want to say is an odorless, colorless gas, it's a known carcinogen. If you're concerned, have the inspector test for it. How do you test for it? 2 ways to test for it. There are these little vials that are about the size of a marker that can sit in the property for a minimum of 48 hours. Whatever the chemical-based test is, basically the air comes in and comes out. They take that in the lab and they determine the amount of radon that's active in that tube, all right, or that vial. There's also a mechanical test that will actually, the machine that will sit there for 48 hours and will just do a printout of the detection of the radon. If it's the EPA guideline, 4.0, if it's 4.0 or higher, that's considered, the EPA says you should really do something about it. If it's higher than that, it should be remediated. Who's responsible for remediating it?
Depends on the offer.
Depends on the offer. It's negotiable. Let's just say it's negotiable. More often than not, the sellers will do it because you're along the process, but I certainly have buyers say, I'll take care of it. Right? The only other place that you can have radon, and again, you don't see it a lot locally. Why? Because we don't have a lot of wells here. There aren't a lot of private wells and homes that we sell in the handovers. But go up to New Hampshire, everything's a well. Go to Boxford, everything's a well. You generally, when there's a private well servicing the house for the potable water, the drinkable water at the house, you'll have a sample taken and you'll have tests done, and they'll talk to you about things like manganese and arsenic. Yes, I said that word, arsenic, radon, so on and so forth. So there can be radon that has been saturated into the water, and if there is, there's a similar process to extract it out. Those systems get very expensive. These systems run anywhere from, call it $1,000 to $1,500, these basic ones. For air, the water systems can go anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000. We had a house in North Reading that was built by a German engineer. The house, you could drop a bomb on this house and it wouldn't move. It was built so well.
problem was that the German engineer wasn't thinking about things, and instead of doing crushed gravel, he did crushed granite. And instead of doing 6 inches, he did 2 feet. The radon levels, now high radon levels are usually like 15, 20, I've seen 30 and 50. The radon levels with that house exceeded 1,000.
Oh, no.
Okay, his radon remediation system for that house cost almost $10,000. Paul Nazaro
Was it?
was his house.
Oh my God.
The house was gone. So that's radon. Okay, it's a very common substance. You just need to be familiar with it. You have questions, we'll get you to a radon expert. Don't try to be an expert on it. What else are things that we come across in our little substances that are not so great?
Mold.
Mold. What do we know about mold?
We met the mold guy.
You met the mold guy. Did anybody not meet the mold guy?
I didn't meet the mold guy.
Okay, you need to meet the mold guy at some point.
Where's the mold?
He's in the closet down the hall.
The deal saver.
Mold.
Does he have a real name? A real person?
Mold is a very, very tricky situation because it can be very deadly. And there are thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions of types of mold. Okay? If an inspector ever says the following, I will find mold here, you got the wrong inspector. Okay? Because of course there's mold in every house. If the inspector comes and says that is mold, the only question I ask the buyer agent, because I'm not an inspector, is, great, how do you know it's mold? The only way to determine that it is mold and what kind of mold is through a swab test or some type of testing. Okay, if most inspectors now are pretty good at saying, hey, that's a mold-like substance. If that's a concern for you, I would strongly suggest that you have an expert come in and take a look at it. Okay, again, there's no requirement under law. My house was literally loaded with mold and I remediated it. As we learned from the mold guy, just bleaching it doesn't really remediate it. Do I have an obligation to disclose it? Nope. Question is, why wouldn't I? Right? And back to the seller's description of property, when you're coaching sellers to fill that out, tell us what you know or don't know about the property. Be honest. If there was a problem, say there was a problem, and then say what you did to fix it. That's an easier conversation to have with a buyer than it is, oh yeah, we did have that problem. Because the inspector comes in and finds some evidence of it, right? They go up into an attic and they see what's called a whitewashed attic. That's indicative of, usually there was some mold found on the sheeting or the joist or something, and it was treated in some form or fashion, and they put some type of kilts on it. Okay, so mold, out of our purview, just know that it can be very nasty stuff. Some people are very susceptible to it from allergies and so on and so forth. What other substances?
Asbestos.
Asbestos. What is it?
Like a type of installation.
Insulation. Do we know anything more about it?
It's not good.
Not good.
When it comes to airborne.
Okay, it causes lung cancer, a very specific kind of lung cancer. You've seen the commercial.
Mesothelioma.
It's a Mesothelioma. Okay.
Very expensive.
Contact.
No.
Okay, so here's what you want to know just for your own working knowledge. So asbestos was very prominent in the early part of last century, starting in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and then we started realizing what the issue was. It's used for any number of things. I've seen it used in roofing. I've seen it used for floor tiles. I've seen it used for siding. It's typically was used for piping insulation. It's an unbelievable insulator. Okay? Particularly, the big concern about asbestos is if it's in a state that's called friable. What does that mean? It means it can become airborne, right, very quickly. Why is it an issue and why does it cause it? So if you think about at the fiber level, think about fiberglass, which is the now replacement of that. A fiberglass fiber looks like this, right? It almost looks like a football. I learned this yesterday at a home inspection. Never knew this after all these years, but it looks like a football. The fibers for asbestos look look like a little fishing hook. And what happens and what makes it so problematic is that these hooks, when you breathe it in, get caught on the little alveoli in your lungs, and they stay there, and that's what causes the mesothelioma.
Someone I went to Edinburgh High School, his father, I don't know where he works, but he died with asbestos.
Yeah, a lot of people in the Navy, a lot of servicemen in the Navy in particular, back in the, from World War II into Korea, into even early parts of Vietnam, were exposed to high levels of it because there was a lot of it used in the insulation of the engine rooms and things like that. Okay, not your job to identify it. You might not even know if you're looking at it. Okay, where it came up, 91 John Street seems to be the example of the week. We were there. They had enclosed what was an outdoor porch. There was a piece of the wall that had the original shingling on the outside. The rest of the exterior of the house had already been vinyl sided. Couldn't tell what was underneath it, but you could see the shingles, and the inspector said that's likely to be asbestos. Why did he say likely? Because unless you test it, you don't know. It could be another material that's very similar to it. Okay, when it's in siding or whatnot, it's as long as it's intact, it's okay. The minute it becomes an issue when it's on siding is when it starts to break or crack. The bigger issue that causes concern is when it's used to wrap pipes. Okay, and it's the pipes in the basement in the older homes where you'll see it more often than not. And you go up and you touch it, and it just kind of goes poof. That's not good. Okay, so just be aware that it might come up at a home inspection.
Is it a long-term exposure thing like radon as well? Like if you just touched it and you breathed a bunch of it in?
That's not good, right? Are you going to have mesothelioma? I have no idea. I don't even want to know.
Yeah.
Okay, but you have pipe wrapping that can look old and could be fiberglass for all you know. You don't know unless you test it, right? And like things like lead, it becomes, if there is asbestos, then there's a certified process that has to be followed to have it remediated. That's highly regulated. You can't just go out and do what my mom did 40 years ago in our basement. She just ripped it down. And I helped her, so I can't wait for that. But
So they don't use that anymore.
it's not used anymore.
So if you were, what date, like if you're looking at a home,
There wasn't a specific date. It wasn't
like a lead
It
thing?
wasn't outlawed like lead that as of this date it doesn't exist. It was certainly phased out.
Okay, so you could have it in a home from like, I don't know, the 1980s.
In your experience, when you see something like a wrap pipe, like you said, it could be fiberglass, whatever, do you just wait until the inspector looks at it, or do you mention to the buyers?
Are you an inspector?
No.
I wouldn't be pointing anything out to the buyers. I would say to the buyers in front of the inspector, Mr. Inspector, can you look at that and help them understand whether that's asbestos or not?
Okay.
Not my job to say, hey, that's asbestos, or I think that's asbestos, or hey. Okay, related to asbestos is another insulator called vermiculite. I'm sure I'm spelling it wrong.
I was counting on you.
No idea. You want to Google it for me, vermiculite? Since you got your phone up there? Vermiculite. I don't know if it's V-I-R or V-E-R.
VERMICULITE.
You
I'm terrible
spelling
at
it. How do you spell it?
Does it end up there? What is it? What does the wiki say it is? Listen up, please.
That's a lot of big words. Vermiculite is a hydrophyllosilicate mineral which undergoes significant expansion when heated. Exfoliation occurs when the mineral is heated sufficiently, and commercial furnaces can routinely produce this effect.
Okay. So it's a mineral, a natural occurring substance. Okay. Why is it? It was used back in the early part of last century as an insulator. You're going to get it to homes, and there's more than a few of them in the area that were built in the late 1800s or the early 1900s. And up in the attic, the inspector's going to say, "Oh, we've got vermiculite up here." Is it a problem in and of itself? No, it's an older type of insulation. It looks like little almost like spitballs, right? It's almost got a little pebbly type of feel and look to it because it's a mineral. The issue is that there was one mine where they mined this, I believe it was in Michigan, where the vermiculite mine had natural occurring asbestos mixed in. And that mine at the time, back in the early part of last century, supplied 70% of the vermiculite insulation around the country. So it's likely, not guaranteed, it's likely that if there's vermiculite insulation remaining in the building, and most of it is not there, but if there is, you will want to have your buyer test it, or suggest to the buyer test it. The inspector is certainly going to pick up on that because of the asbestos contamination that occurred in the mining of it. From one mine supplied 70% of it for when it was being used.
Poor miners, and they'll still be dead.
I'm sure they are now.
It was like a while ago.
That's true, they probably died of old age anyways.
Okay, those are probably the most common. Those are probably the most common things that you're going to hear about.
What about termites?
What about them?
Are they common here or no?
They're very common. Now again, here's why you go to home inspections. I did a home inspection in Middleton, New Hampshire about 3 weeks ago. This property sits on a lake, completely surrounded by woods. I mean, completely surrounded by woods. And the buyer says to the inspector, you know, did you see any evidence of termites? And he just starts laughing. I say to him, is that a funny question? He goes, I know you guys are from Massachusetts. The buyer is from Massachusetts as well. He goes, the interesting thing is what we have found over the years, and I'm not laughing at you, I'm kind of laughing with you, is that when you get up above, does everybody know where Route 101 is? Route 101 in New Hampshire runs basically from Manchester across the state to Portsmouth. He goes, once you get above 101, because of the temperature change, there are no termites. So just so you know, a little fun fact there. But yes, there's lots of termites here. What are termites? They're ant-like creatures, is the best description that I have on them. They're wood boring. They do significant damage, right? They're evidence you usually, you know, because you'll hear the inspectors talk about the distance between wood shingling or clapboard shingling, any type of wood product that's used on a house, the distance between that wood product and the ground. A lot of times on these older houses, there wasn't a lot of space. You'll actually see the soil pushed right up against it. That's prime for these termites to get in. They're subterranean creatures. They do not like daylight, except for one time of the year when they fly or whatever it is that they do. Evidence of them is if you see a foundation, you'll actually see what are called mud tubes. They'll create little tubes that they can crawl up the side of a foundation, even up a couple feet to get to a wood structure. We have had houses that have had plenty of termites. We had one house over in North Andover on Waverly Road where you could stand, it was an old cape, and you could stand and the floor would have this, what's called deflection. It would bounce. So we had a contractor come over and look at it, and the home inspectors have these long, big metal posts that they jab into the sills. If you think about a construction, you have that, remember the foundation wall is here. On top of the foundation wall, you have a wood sill, which is basically a wood plate that is attached to the foundation here, right? And then your frame is built off of that sill. It's what attaches the framing of the house to the foundation. A lot of times, this is where you get a lot of damage by termites. So a carrying beam, relevant point, in many houses, when you look at them, when they talk about being a structural wall or a load-bearing wall, in the older houses, when you go down the basement, you'll see that if this is the foundation of the house, right, you have this thing called a carrying beam, and then your joist cut across like this to be able to carry the deck of the floor. So this is a carrying beam. Why? Because it carries the whole load of the house on it, not to get too technical. So the inspector's in the garage in this case, and he's poking this thing with a probe. And he goes like this, and by accident, he let it out of his hand, and it flew through an 8-inch carrying beam straight to the other side and stuck in the wall. Why? Well, we had a contractor come in and remove it, and that portion that we removed was right there. 65% of the carrying beam was gone due to termites. The termites had come into the house here, got their way to the carrying beam and then chewed all the way in here into the carrying beam. Literally, I think if I had gone upstairs and jumped on the floor, the house probably would have went. Okay, termites. There are other wood-boring insects. You have carpenter bees, you have carpenter ants, you have all kinds of other things.
This was on Waverly Road? That's good to know. My neighbors at the house that.
Probably. No, it was on the corner, one end from the corner of Waverly and, okay. So, but remember, none of these, so when we go back to vermiculite, asbestos, mold, radon, there are no requirements in terms of disclosure like there are with lead paint. Okay, lead paint is a state mandated, federally mandated, regulated disclosure. Asbestos is a federally mandated substance in terms of how it gets remediated and at the state level and so on and so forth, but lead paint is the only one that requires your active involvement in the disclosure of it. Lead paint is the only one that is required by law that sellers say, I have knowledge, I have no knowledge, I have documents, I have no documents. Okay. So what I'm going to do, Julie, I'll email it to you afterwards. I'm going to go out and get 2 pamphlets for you. I'm going to get the lead paint information packet, which tells you all about the nasty things that lead paint does, which I would like you to read for our sessions next week. And I'm also going to give you the CCCP documentation, which is a 12-page document from the state of Massachusetts, about lead paint and the disclosures and so on and so forth. I would like you to read both for next week's session. So the first session, I don't think we have Zillow next week. So
I think it's 2 weeks.
it's 2 weeks. So I'm trying to make next week the last formal week of, so 3 more sessions of boot camp, and then you're done with me, at least to get started. You can do whatever you want.
Do I have to
If
follow?
it starts, it doesn't matter. But Tuesday, I want to do lead paint. Okay. Wednesday and Friday are going to be how to determine value, how to determine fair market value on property. Okay.
Yeah. Do we ever go over, the exclusive right to sell?
We can, if we want, that I can kind of compress so what we can do is lead paint, let's do lead paint Tuesday, let's do the exclusive right to list agreement on Wednesday, and then we'll do fair market value on Friday, and then if we want additional sessions, I'll leave it up to you all. Right, either as a group or individual. Okay, so I'll go get that stuff for you, but any questions on disclosures and lead paint and so on and so forth? I've got 10 minutes. How about we talk about Title V?
So these are not mandatory disclosures, but you said if they were asked about them, then they should be truthful about them. So would it be good practice for us to regularly ask every seller, do you have radon, do you have mold, do you have asbestos?
Well, the good news is if you hand them a seller's description of property or a seller's disclosure or a statement of property conditions, all of those questions are already in there.
Do you give them this for them to answer?
Yes. I give it to them as homework. And then when they say, oh, do I have to fill this out? No, you don't. But why wouldn't you? And if the answer is, because I've never lived in the property, that's a decent answer. And you say, okay. If they say, I don't want to share any information, then you need to have a more in-depth conversation. Why don't you want to share information?
Oh, so the seller disclosure that you have in the packet is for them to fill out.
Correct. Yeah. Tell us what you know or don't know about a property. If you've had a problem, tell us what the problem is and what you done to correct the problem.
So I guess they could leave the section blank, but if they actually knew about something and they wrote no knowledge, that would be a lot.
And it came to, that would be fraud.
Okay.
How you gonna prove it?
But they could leave it blank, but then you'll say why you didn't blank.
The most important thing that I want you to take away about the statement of condition, the seller's disclosure, whatever you want to call that document, is that you, 6 of you, under no circumstances are to ever fill that out. I don't care if the seller's deaf, dumb, and blind. Get them to find somebody to fill it out for them. Here's why. 20 years ago, before I got here, although it was still in process when I arrived, Lillian had sold a house on Patton Lane in North Andover. The issue with the house, just for full disclosure, was the house had a sloping driveway that sloped down into the garage, okay? So it was prone to water coming down the driveway as water does, and come into the driveway, and the previous owners, had put in drains and so on and so forth. The sellers had written in the seller's description of property, we have this problem. The problem was, hey, we have water coming down the driveway that would then come into our garage, and at one point, it was so much volume it got into the basement, and the basement was finished. That's why we done these things. That was written in by the seller on the seller's description of property. Lillian sells the house to a buyer. The buyer has signed off on all of this information. There's some big storm, there's a big meltdown. What happens, this huge volume of water comes down, not like a tidal wave, but close enough, and gets into the basement. The buyer, the new owner of the house, sues Lillian and sues the seller for failure to disclose it. Okay? Now, the issue was it was plain for everybody to see that it was on the seller's description of property. But like any lawsuit, you can sue for any reason, and until one side gives up or you get to some degree of reasonable mutual decision, it goes through the process. It got to the point where Lillian even got deposed. And in the deposition, the attorneys are asking her, actually, I think she might have gone to trial. I can't remember because it literally happened like the first month I was here. Whether it was a deposition or trial, the attorneys asked her, did you fill this out? And she said no. And what she found out after the fact was, had she filled it out, she then takes on the liability for the information that she's scribing in there, however accurate or inaccurate it is. So never, ever, 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 ever fill one of those out on behalf of your client. Okay. Ultimately, the lawsuit got thrown out. Why? Because there was a disclosure by the seller that said, hey, we had this problem. This is what we did to fix it. We weren't warranting it that it would never happen again, but we've told you we had a problem. This is what we did to fix it. Sorry, there was that much rain or snow melt or whatever it was that caused it to overwhelm the system, and it happened again. But that's not our fault. We tried to fix it. Okay, let's talk about real quick this thing called Title V. What is Title V? Septic what?
Okay.
What's that? Everybody know?
Basically, the inspection of private septic.
Inspection of a private septic. More specifically, Title V is the reference, the common reference to the section of the Mass General Laws that deals with private sewage septic systems that are on properties. Okay, so what does that mean? That means it's not on town sewer. Okay. What does the law say about, what is Title V? What is that law? The law states that you, Jessica, as a property owner, when you go to sell your property, you have an obligation to have your private septic system, if there's one on your property, inspected by a licensed approved inspector, so that, and who will generate a report. The report has 3 different flavors. It has passes, it has conditional pass, and it has failure. Okay? If it's a pass, what does that mean? It means that it passed the inspection and it seems to be in good working order based on the predetermined criteria that is in the state regulation. It's an 18-page report. Conditional pass means what? It means it's operating, but there is a point of repair that's needed. Okay? Failure means what? It ain't working. Okay? This report, which is generated by a licensed inspector, gets filed with the local Board of Health based on the town that you're in. So if you're in Andover, it goes to the Board of Health and goes to the owner of the property. If it is anything other than a pass, in order for you to have an operable, approved septic system, you will need to get something called a certificate of compliance. What does that mean? That means that a repair has been made, the health inspector has come out to the property, has inspected the repair that's been made, and has certified that it was made to the specifications in building code. Board of Health that manages that. Okay. Failure means it has to be replaced. Let me tell you what that process looks like very quickly. Grab your pens. Hopefully it will be rare that you have to deal with this. If you have a failed septic system on your property or your seller does, the process looks like this. The seller needs to engage an engineer. The engineer engages the Board of Health. The engineer and the Board of Health go out to your property or your seller's property and dig little holes in the ground. And they complete what's called a perk test or percolation test. In other words, they're digging a hole and they pour 5 gallons of water and they time how fast it goes down. And they kind of look at the soil composition. That perk test determines where a leach field can be built. Hold on to that thought for a second. Here's what a septic system consists of. So you have your little house here. Okay. Your house has all that lovely indoor plumbing, so you don't have to go outside anymore. And it goes out, and that all goes out to what's called the tank. Okay. Those tanks are typically in the magnitude of common practice of 1,500 gallon tanks. Okay. I won't bore you about baffles and all kinds of other constructions, but think about this. The waste comes out, the solids stay here on the bottom of the tank, the liquid fills at the top of the tank to a point where it goes out of pipe, and then there's a thing out in the field somewhere called a distribution box, which think of it as a splitter. It will take the flow of the liquid and split it amongst what are called the tranches or trenches of the leach field. Getting more information than you ever wanted.
Never knew.
Okay? So the points of failure in your septic system are the tank itself. Is there a crack in the tank? So it either has to be replaced or repaired. The distribution box is a point of failure. Your leaching fields are a point of failure. Okay? And so what I was saying was, so these perk tests are done to determine what happens is that the liquids come out, they go into this leach field, and they go through the ground, and it naturally purifies the wastewater. And that wastewater eventually, after going through the ground, goes back into the natural water table, however low that is. Okay? And so depending on where you are and how high the water tables are, there are different designs and systems and criteria. I won't even get into any of that. So you go out and get a perk test done. Back to what do you do with a failed septic system? Perk test determines where this system is and the type of system it will be. Your engineer then so that perk test is going to take anywhere from 1 to 2 weeks to occur. Your engineer then takes that information, goes back and does a design. Those designs typically take anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks. Yeah. The design is then submitted to the Board of Health and any other related boards in the town. What do I mean by that? Well, if there's wetlands in the immediate area, within 100 feet of that, it's going to have to go through Conservation Committee as well for approval. But let's stick with the Board of Health. So the plan gets submitted to the Board of Health, and simultaneously that plan typically will be sent out to one or more contractors to get a preliminary estimate of what the cost to replace it is, the cost to build it. That approval process through the Board of Health is going to be anywhere from 8 to 12 weeks. Okay? Guess what? It is a rare day that a plan is submitted and changes aren't needed. So once there are comments on it by the town, that plan's probably going to come back to the engineer, and it could be another 2 to 4 weeks for it to be resubmitted back to the town for approval. And then the approval is usually forthcoming pretty quickly. If Conservation Committee is involved, it's a whole different ball of wax, because you have to go through what's called a notice of intent, which means you have to file to be part of a meeting. The Conservation Committee meetings happen once a month, sometimes two in the busier months, but once a month. So this can have ramifications on the timelines of offers and so on and so forth. Now, what's really interesting is we have sold and closed on plenty of properties with failed septic systems over the years. Dozens, not hundreds, but dozens out of the thousands that we've done. How is that possible? Most lenders, not all lenders, most lenders will say, okay, you have a failure. As long as you have an approved plan by the town, what we're going to do is take the money, we're going to require that money from the sale, from the seller, get escrowed at the closing 1.5 times whatever the estimate is, to be able to make sure that that gets built, and it gets built after the closing.
That's always paid for by the seller.
No. You fell into my trap. You fell into my
I remember
trap.
that question.
It's negotiable, right? But again, in all the years that we've done this, and the dozens of times where this has happened, once can I remember where the buyer paid for it. And it was a property that had 18 offers on it. It was a complete gut shot to begin with. And the builder just said, yep, I'll take care of it, where nobody else would. Okay, it's great. 99.9% of the time is paid for by the seller, but the law does not require that. The law just requires that this report, this inspection be done. Now that inspection lasts for 2 years. So if I do the inspection today, it's good till September 24th, 25th, 2022. Now, if I pump a year from now, if I pump this tank out on September 25th, 2021, and then I pump this tank out on or before September 25th, 2022, the law says as long as you're pumping the tank, you get an extra year out of that report. So then it becomes a three-year report.
So if you have a failure, how long on average does that whole process take?
So if you think about 216, you're probably looking at anywhere, and it depends on the time of year, because you can't necessarily construct you're gonna have a hard time constructing a septic system in certainly December, late December for sure, no way in January, no way in February, unlikely in March, just because of weather conditions. So even if you timed it right, you're probably not looking any less than 20 some odd weeks. Okay, but the law is the inspection process only. Who pays for it is negotiable, but it's 99.9% of the time it's the seller.
Because they usually do it before they list it anyways.
They usually do it before they list if they're smart, and if they know they're a failure. The bank is not going to allow any lender, a borrower rather, to buy a dysfunctional property that has a failed septic system without knowing that it's going to be replaced. They're just not. Now, if it's a cash deal, doesn't matter.
It's smart too, if you're gonna be listing a house, if they don't have the Title V passed already, then you should have them do it before it gets listed, because then you definitely want to wait to list it if they do fail.
Okay. So I don't like to cross over into New Hampshire, but I know some of you are taking New Hampshire tests or studying for it.
Yeah.
There is no Title V.
Oh, right.
Hallelujah.
No Title V in New Hampshire.
How much does that repair usually,
The repair or the replacement.
both, I guess?
The replacement could be anywhere from 10,000, if that. I think it's much more than that now, but it could be $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. Okay. Now, New Hampshire, there is no Title V. There is no similar law. I don't care what anybody tells you. There is no similar law. There's no requirement of a seller, because the vast majority of properties in New Hampshire are on septics. There is no law that requires the seller to do any type of inspection except something called a site assessment. Write that down. This is New Hampshire only. New Hampshire law requires that any property within 200 feet of the water line of a body of water, and it does depend on the body of water, but just assume any body of water that has a septic system must have a site assessment completed before a purchase and sale is signed. If a purchase and sale is signed without a site assessment, the purchase and sale is conditioned on the site assessment. Here's what a site assessment is. A site assessment is when a septic designer goes out to a property and evaluates, not inspects, evaluates the site for whether or not the system, the existing system, meets the New Hampshire requirements for a septic on a property that's 200 feet from a water line. It's either yes, it does, or no, it doesn't. It's purely an evaluation. If it doesn't, the existing system is considered grandfathered in, and nothing needs to happen. When that system fails, what will have to happen is the owner of that property will have to have a design done that does get approved by the state. So they can't replace it with another unapproved system. They're going to have to approve, they're going to have to go through a state process to get it approved because of the proximity to the water. Why? Because most of the bodies of water in New Hampshire are drinking water sources. And so they're looking to make sure that over the course of time, that ultimately all of those properties, as they transfer, are eventually going to be brought into compliance. You guys thought real estate was easy.
It's a whole lot of crap.
A whole lot of crap. You're so full of shit, it's unbelievable. Questions?
Is that the same thing? It is also negotiable if it were to get a no and need
No.
to be replaced with a
No, because it's not an evaluation of the system. So when we were up in Middleton, New Hampshire, the buyer hired a septic company to do a formal inspection of the system. They got an evaluation of the quality and current status of the system. The site assessment is just a designer going out and looking at the lay of the land and saying, does it meet today's standards? In fact, the site designer doesn't even put a shovel in the ground. They're out there looking at the conditions and figuring out where the septic system is in relation to the lot lines and to the water lines, and does it meet the state requirements in terms of distance. The only other thing to remember is that in New Hampshire, a well, because most properties have well, a well must be at least 100 feet from any septic system by law. Okay. I will go get your lead paint door prizes. I'll be right back.
But then you have to bring that 14 changes or whatever it is with the lead thing.
You do have to?
You do.
Yeah. I'm joking.
I was like,
Yeah, you do? Nah.
this one looks more intimidating to me or explain.
Yeah, but you don't have to explain that one like in as much detail. That one, like, you could literally explain it in like 6 minutes.
Really?
It's just like you explain like you could literally on a piece of paper write down like 10 bullet notes and just read off the bullet notes and be like, yep, that's what that is. It's like super simple.
Hopefully Monday I'll be sent.
Really? Is it the Boston person?
Maybe, Lily.
That'd be huge.
But it could be just looking at.
Take one and pass along. There's your lead paint. Here's what you need to know about lead paint. And this is the CLPPP, the Childhood Lead Poisoning Prevention Program for the state of Massachusetts. Take one and pass it along. Julie, I'll email them to you.
Thank you.
Questions? You're welcome. Questions?
Nope.
You want to read both these before,
Please read both of those. We're going to mirror the same things. Tuesday, Wednesday, 2 to 4. Friday, 1 to 3. Tuesday, let's paint. Wednesday, so at the end of Tuesday, I'll send you out or give to you the exclusive right to the lift agreement. You'll read that for Wednesday, and then Friday we'll do how to determine value of a piece of property, the fair market value of a piece of property. Okay?
Tuesday, Wednesday, too.
Tuesday, Wednesday, 2 to 4, I'll send out the invitation, probably tomorrow.
Okay.
If I can get through a couple hundred emails today.
See you later, Julie.
See you, Julie.
Bye,
Any
guys.
questions?
Thank you. No, I'm good.
Okay.